Because in this story, there's this rich man, and there's Lazarus, who is a beggar. Now, Lazarus, being a beggar, probably meant that he had a physical disability. It's very common in the Bible that if someone was a beggar, it's because they had a physical disability. We see that with people who were blind, people who were lame, people who had leprosy. They were begging because they couldn't work because of the physical ailment they had. So Lazarus is a beggar. So he's probably got a physical disability. Now, in their culture, and it's true in some cultures today, and even some churches teach something similar to this, but in their culture, the reason Lazarus was poor and a beggar is because he clearly wasn't holy. They would have believed he is in this position because he's not righteous. He's in this position because he hasn't got the favor of God. However, the rich man, he's wealthy. Therefore, he's clearly been blessed by God. Therefore, he's the righteous one. Now, we see this really clearly in another story in John chapter 9. I'll just read the verse from it. John chapter 9, verse 2 says, and his disciples, Jesus' disciples, asked him, Rabbi, they've just met a blind man, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So there's a general belief that if someone is born blind, it's because he's sinned or his parents have sinned, but there's some sort of sin taking place. And so if you're disabled, if you're poor, it's because you're a sinner, because you've done something wrong, or someone in your family's done something wrong. Whereas there was this general belief that if you're rich, it's because you're somehow righteous and your family is righteous. However, Jesus brings this plot twist, because when Jesus starts talking about Abraham, they would go, okay, Abraham in heaven, in paradise, is receiving and meeting someone who's died. The righteous man is going to go to heaven because he's clearly got the favor of the Lord upon him, because he's not the righteous, because he's rich, and that makes him righteous. Sorry, the rich man's going to go to heaven because he must be the righteous one because he's been blessed on earth. That's what they would have assumed would be said. But plot twist, Jesus says, no. The poor man, the beggar, Lazarus, he is received by Abraham, and the wealthy man ends up in a place of torment. This is a big plot twist. Are you following me, guys? Because it's quite complicated. Yeah, this is a big plot twist. And Jesus is teaching something very different. I think this is a point worth hammering home, right? That Jesus is saying, no. It's not about you being blessed on earth. It doesn't matter if you're rich on earth. It doesn't matter mean you're holy. And if you're poor on earth, or if you're struggling or suffering or sick, it doesn't mean that you're not holy. That's not how it works. It's not about your sickness, your wealth, your blessing levels on earth does not affect what happens after you die. You may invest all your time, energy, and effort in getting rich. I've dropped my cable now. Here we go. Getting rich in this short part of life. You may put all your effort into getting rich in this part of life, and invest all your time into getting wealthy and having a big house and not, needing anything at all in this part of life. But what you invest in here, into this part of life, well, it's not going to affect what happens here. In fact, you need to invest in the eternal for it to make a big difference. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Good stuff. And so it says in verse 26, Abraham is speaking to the rich man who is crying out, saying, please send Lazarus to give me some water. And then he says, please let Lazarus go and tell my family about what will happen. Abraham is speaking to Lazarus in verse 26 and says this, and besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed in place, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. You see, it isn't about how rich we are on earth, or our blessings on earth, or all that jazz. Abraham is saying Jesus is saying in this parable that there is a chasm, a separation between the place of blessing and the place of curse. And that chasm is fixed in place. That chasm cannot be crossed. And that chasm, I think it's important that we know this, is caused by our sin. Sin is what created that chasm. Let's go back to the beginning. I do this a few times, but right back to the beginning, to the book of Genesis, to Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. And in Genesis 1 and 2, we see God creates the heavens and the earth. It says in Genesis 1 that before time began, God existed. So God existed before time began. Then he created time. He created the heavens and the earth. He spoke and the world began. He made the universe. He made the stars. He made the planets, and he made the planet Earth, and he made it, and he said everything in it was good. And he created all the animals and the birds and the fish and the trees and the life on the earth. And he put the fish in the sea, and he put the birds in the air, and he separated the waters below from the waters above. And he said it was all good. And then after he created the heavens and the earth, and he created all the animals and everything in it, he made another species, another creature. But he made this creature differently to how he made the rest of the creatures. This creature he made in his image and likeness, it says. And this creature were the first humans, who the Bible calls Adam and Eve. So he's made everything in existence, and it's all good, but then human beings he makes differently. He makes them in his image and his likeness. And then he places them not just in the earth, he places them in a special place, a garden paradise called Eden, which was likely a mountain, and he places them in Eden. And this mountain was a place where God, what sort of heaven and earth would touch. And God, it says, would walk in the garden with Adam and Eve, with the human beings. And he gave the human beings a role, a purpose to rule over and subdue all of creation. And so he made human beings differently to everything else. He made human beings, you and I, on purpose, for a purpose, separate to all the rest of creation, to be in relationship with him. And it was all great, it was all perfect, it was all wonderful, until the human beings rebelled against God. They did a thing that we call sin. God said, do not eat from the tree in the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What did they do? They both ate from the tree. They did the thing that God told them not to do, and in doing so, they rebelled against God. They sinned. Now, God is holy, and holiness and sinfulness do not mix. Holiness hates sin, and sin hates holiness. They cannot mix. They cannot coexist. In fact, God's holiness is so powerful that sinfulness simply cannot exist in the presence of God's holiness. And so Adam and Eve had to leave this garden paradise, and God could no longer walk with his people the way he had designed and intended to do so. But God didn't want us to be separated from him. And so in Leviticus and the law, basically God created these strict rules to follow, which were called the law, and these strict sacrificial system, which you find in Leviticus. And these rules and these sacrifices were designed that God's presence could be amongst his people, even just a little bit. Not in the way that he designed it to be in Eden, but his presence could still be amongst his people. But God wanted to remove sin permanently. He didn't want us to have sin separating us from him. And he knew the only way to do that was by he himself, as the Son, stepping out of heaven, off the throne, and coming to the earth and living as a human being, as Jesus. A human being who was 100% human and 100% God at the same time. A human being who never sinned, who never failed, who never rebelled, who was completely innocent. And a human being who would be a sacrifice to remove the sin, our sin, because we've all sinned, we've all rebelled, from us, so we could be once again united with God the way he had originally designed. Now, in the story of Abraham's bosom, Abraham says there's a chasm between us and you, from the place of curse and the place of blessing, and it cannot be crossed. And that chasm was created by sin, and that's why Adam and Eve had to leave the garden. That sin separates us from God too. But then Jesus came, and by living this perfect life and then going to the cross and being crucified in our place, taking our punishment for us, and then defeating sin and death and rising again after 3 days. By doing that, Jesus made a way to cross the chasm. The cross allows us to cross the chasm from a place of punishment to a place of blessing. Jesus made a way for us to cross this gap.